Imagine you have done everything right. You followed the advice, cut the subscriptions, skipped the vacations, drove the older car, and every single month, without fail, you moved $1,000 into your savings account, $12,000 a year. And for a while, watching that number climb felt like proof that you were different, more disciplined, more intentional than the people who spent everything they earned and wondered where it went. Except 5 years later, you have $60,000 saved, and something feels quietly wrong. The number is real. The sacrifice was real. And yet the financial freedom you were working toward feels no closer than when you started. This video is about why that happens and what the math actually says about where that $1,000 needs to go instead. The first thing to understand is that saving money and building wealth are not the same activity. They feel similar because they both involve not spending. Both require restraint, consistency, and delayed gratification. But the mechanism is entirely different. And confusing the two is one of the most costly financial mistakes a person can make over a decade. Saving is the act of preserving capital. Wealth building is the act of deploying capital in a way that generates more capital. One is storage, the other is an engine. And an engine sitting in storage does not run. The cultural messaging around personal finance has blurred this distinction for generations. Frugality and wealth have been presented as the same thing so consistently that most people never stop to question whether the tool they are using is actually designed for the job they are trying to do. To see why this matters concretely, consider what $1,000 a month actually does in a standard savings account over 10 years. At a typical rate of 4 to 5% annually, your $60,000 in contributions would grow to somewhere between $73,000 and $78,000. That is real. That is not nothing. But now, consider what the same $1,000 per month does when invested consistently in a broad market index fund averaging a historical return of 8 to 10% annually. Over the same 10 years, that monthly contribution grows to between $180,000 and $210,000. Extend the timeline to 20 years and the gap becomes almost incomprehensible. The savings account produces roughly $300,000 while the invested equivalent approaches $700,000. The difference is not luck, not income, not sophistication. It is simply the mechanism you chose and whether compounding works for you or quietly fails to. But the math alone does not explain the full picture because the problem goes deeper than the interest rate on your account. It goes into the psychology of what saving signals to your own brain. When saving is your primary financial strategy, you are operating from a posture of protection. Every financial decision gets filtered through one question: how do I hold on to what I have? And while that question is appropriate at certain life stages, it has a ceiling. It is a defensive strategy in a game that also requires offense. The people who build meaningful wealth over time are not just good at not losing money. They are good at putting money to work. Those are genuinely different skills. Protection and growth are not opposites, but staying permanently in protection mode means you never develop the second skill at all. And that gap compounds quietly over years just as surely as interest does. There is also a structural problem that savings first thinking consistently ignores, and it is one of the most quietly destructive forces in personal finance: inflation. When you save $1,000 a month in a traditional savings account, you are not fully preserving the purchasing power of that money. Inflation, running historically at 2 to 3% annually in stable economies, continuously erodes what each saved dollar can actually buy. A dollar saved today will purchase less in 10 years than it does right now. This means that in real terms, a savings only strategy is not neutral. It is a slow leak. You are running on a treadmill that moves slightly backward, and the discipline of putting money away every month does not change the direction of the belt. What makes this particularly difficult to recognize is that the balance keeps climbing. The number grows. And because humans are wired to respond to visible signals of progress, a growing balance feels like advancement, even when the real purchasing power of that balance is quietly declining. The number tells you one story. The purchasing power tells you another. There is one more layer that rarely gets discussed, and it has to do with opportunity cost. Every month that $1,000 sits in a savings account is a month it is not compounding at a higher rate somewhere else. Opportunity cost is not a loss you can see on a statement. There is no line item that reads amount you failed to earn by making a conservative choice. But it accumulates over decades in ways that become staggering when you finally calculate them. The person who invested consistently starting at 25 does not just have more money than the person who started at 35, they have a fundamentally different financial life. Not because they earned more or worked harder, but because their money had 10 additional years to compound. Those 10 years cannot be recovered. The opportunity they represented does not appear anywhere on a balance sheet, which is precisely why it is so easy to lose without ever noticing it is gone. None of this means saving is wrong. An emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a liquid, accessible account is not optional. It is the base layer that makes every other strategy possible. Without it, a single unexpected expense forces you to liquidate investments or take on debt, and either outcome sets back the compounding process in ways that take years to recover from. The savings account has a job. It is just a very specific job, and the mistake is treating it as the entire career rather than the foundation. Once that foundation is in place and maintained, every additional dollar that goes into a savings account rather than a growth vehicle is quietly working against the outcome you are trying to build. The floor is essential, but you cannot live on the floor forever. The shift that changes outcomes is not complicated to describe. Money sitting idle is not safe. It is slowly losing the race against time and inflation. The goal is not to accumulate dollars in storage. The goal is to build systems where your money generates more money with minimal additional input from you. Index funds do this. Real estate structured correctly does this. Business ownership does this. The specific vehicle matters less than the underlying principle that capital deployed participates in the growth of the broader economy, rather than sitting outside of it watching that growth happen to other people's money. $1,000 a month is a genuinely meaningful amount of capital. Deployed consistently into growth-oriented vehicles over 15 or 20 years, it produces outcomes that feel almost implausible from where you are standing right now. The compounding is real. The mechanism is proven. The math requires no luck, no connections, no exceptional circumstance. It requires only a different choice about where the money goes, and the consistency to make that choice every single month for long enough that the engine has time to run. Saving $1,000 a month is not the problem. It is actually the beginning of something powerful. The only question is whether that discipline gets pointed at a container that keeps your money quiet and slow, or at a system that puts it to work. The effort is identical. The outcome over 20 years is not even close.